Hello to my Theories of Personality students. I hope you're all doing okay. We're getting down to the end, and I'm going to be doing a lecture today on Rogers' theory of personality and talk a little bit about Maslow. So to just kind of set the stage, the big picture, I sent you an email earlier today, and I'm working on coming up with a way to make a nice user-friendly final exam for you. The grades on the midterms overall were really good. I was happy with that. Um, Normally, I'd be asking you to kind of take all of the different theories and put them together, but I think I'm going to do something a little bit different. So anyway, sometime tomorrow, look at your emails because you'll be getting a final exam from me. But it's not going to be a killer, I promise you that. So anyway, our last group of theories that we're going to talk about today, and then maybe the day after tomorrow, we'll finish it up, I think, are the humanistic existential theories of personality. And just like with the behavioral theories, they came in different sorts of flavors, Skinner versus Bandura, and so on. The same is true with the humanistic theories of personality. There's not just one humanistic theory. Think humanistic psychology is a school of thought. It's a philosophy, and under that theory, I'm sorry, under that school are a number of different theories. But just as under the psychodynamic theory, Freud is the one that we study, with humanistic theories, the one that we're really going to focus on is the theory of Carl Rogers. No relationship to Fred Rogers, as far as I know. Although I like to imagine that that's true, but it's really not. Um, Carl Rogers was a mid 20th century American psychologist who developed really the prototypical humanistic theory of personality. Now, Abraham Maslow was a contemporary of Rogers. And Maslow, working in the same framework that Rogers did, also expanded the focus of humanistic theories. So, and I think many of you may recognize the name Maslow as it relates to that triangle, the hierarchy of needs. That's only one part of Maslow's theory. Now, humanistic psychology is in some ways related to existential philosophy and existential psychology. Existentialism as a philosophical movement originated in Europe, and it actually goes back a ways. But most people, when they talk about existentialism, are really talking about a philosophy to understand human nature that emerged post World War II in Europe. And humanistic psych and existential psych, though they're different, they have some similar roots. They kind of come out of a similar tree, so to speak. They both struggle with trying to understand philosophically and psychologically what human nature is fundamentally about. So, so why did humanistic theories emerge at the point that they did? There's a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is humanistic psychology is in some ways a rejection of behaviorism, especially Skinner's behaviorism. Remember Skinner, radical behaviorism, right? You and I, as humans, are basically complicated rats and cats and dogs and other sorts of animals. The rules of learning are the same for us as for them. To humanistic psychologists and existential psychologists, that starting place is fundamentally flawed. To a humanistic psychologist, any theory which attempts to kind of reduce us to the same functioning of other animals utterly misses the boat, because humanistic existentialists believe that to be human is utterly unique. Yes, in some ways we're like other animals, but to these folks, the differences um, of human behavior are what what really count. Um, and why is that? Well, part of the answer to that is to humanists. No other animal has as much awareness and self-awareness as humans do. Um, we have concerns and issues and struggles and joys that other animals don't have in the same ways that we do. We're the animal that creates philosophies, theology, different religions. We're the animal that builds these things, right? We're the animal that has clocks and classrooms. Remember classrooms? Right? And so, because we are so much more aware than other animals are, we're aware of our finiteness. We're aware that we're going to die someday. We're aware that we are enmeshed in time, that there's a past and a present and a future, right? We're aware and smart enough to know that life is fundamentally a mystery, right? And we try to answer that mystery by different philosophies and psychologies and different religions. But fundamentally, it's a mysterious event. So, to start with the primary point of humanistic existential psychology, any theory which compares us to basically being complicated versions of other animals, they reject completely. So, part of why humanistic psych emerged in the mid to late 20th century was as a rejection against mid 20th century behaviorism and something called reductionism. I mean, Skinner's basic take was to reduce us down to the simplest level of other animals. They reject that completely. But there's another reason why humanistic psyche emerged um, at the point in history that it did, and that has to do with World War II and how how um, Nazi complicity and how Nazism led to a lot of quote unquote good Germans basically looking the other way, either being involved directly or simply being in denial. And one of the questions that was left post World War II and post Holocaust is, what is it about human nature that we are capable of doing such wonderful things, but also capable of doing such god awful, horrendous things? Um, and social psychology actually emerged significantly post World War II in terms of trying to study and comprehend the tendency in all humans, to sometimes behave in overly conforming, blindly obedient, and highly authoritarian ways. And frankly, I think if we look at some things that are going on in the United States, we've got the same questions here again. Um, in attempting to answer the question, what is it about humans that we are sometimes willing to be led like sheep to the slaughter, so to speak? And why is it that sometimes decent people can do such god awful things, right? That impetus to try to understand that question gave rise to modern social psychology, but also gave rise to humanistic psychology. So, humanistic psychology really puts the exploration of human nature. What are we about? And why are we so like bimodal? We are so capable of such good and such evil. And one person can encompass both those things. Humanistic psych was an attempt to try to shine light on what happened, right? And when we talk about the Holocaust of World War II, right? That's one of many, many Holocausts. There were many Holocausts of different groups of people before World War II and since World War II, right? So we're not talking about an isolated event here. Um, Now, from social psych, you may recognize some of those famous studies. Remember the Milgram study in the studies in the 1960s, asking college students to administer electrical shock to somebody every time that a person made a mistake on a various type of exam. You may remember the Zimbardo experiment of 1970, aka the Stanford Prison Experiment. There was the ASCH research done in the 50s, which was one of the earlier morphs of that kind of exploration. It's no coincidence that people began to study these things post World War II. So let me start today by just kind of laying the foundation for understanding Rogers and Maslow, and to talk kind of more generally about the what humanistic theories are all about. Number one, as a good starting place, all humanistic theories of personality attempt to explore, in quotes, what they call, quotes, the basic human condition. What is it to be human? And how does being human differ from other animals on the planet? So they start again with the premise that humans are not simply complicated versions of other animals. Because we are aware, there's things that you and I have to deal with psychologically that other animals get a pass from. So let's name some of those things. Number one, we're the animal that is aware of the passage of time. We have an awareness of time passing in a way that other animals do not, right? We think of ourselves on a timeline, right? There was yesterday, there was when you were a little baby, there was, you as in eighth grade, and here's you now, and then we think of a future, right? We're going through a time right now, if you think about it, right? Our humans are, many of us, worried about the future for all kinds of reasons, right? Has the COVID situation triggered not just an anxiety of dying or people you love dying, but also all kinds of uncertainties as we look ahead. Other animals do not experience time in the way that we do. There was, there is, there will be. It takes a lot of awareness to know that. Now, when you and I were newborn babies, we didn't have that awareness yet. But somewhere in childhood, we all became aware of this sense of timeline, right? So why is that important? Well, to be human means we're aware that we're enmeshed in time. And we're also aware, and this is another piece of the human condition, that we are finite, right? Infinite versus finite. We're limited, right? Um, do you remember somewhere in grade school when you were studying evolution and they may have taught you, how long since there have been humans on the planet, how long has that been in terms of the broad sweep of evolution? And it was like maybe the last 5 minutes of the last day of December 31st, right? Um, and that's humanity, right? What about you and me in our short, brief lives? This awareness of time also makes us recognize that we're finite. And we have expressions, that kind of capture that. Here's one of them. If not now, then when? If I don't do something now, if I don't say something now, if I don't make a choice now, will I ever have that opportunity again? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? And so part of being human, because we have these big brains that are highly aware, is we have this paradox. We know enough to know that we can never know everything there is to know, right? Think about when you want to make a good decision. There's something important you have to decide about, and it's a big deal. It's an important decision, right? And so you do your homework, you think, you talk to people, you weigh, you evaluate, you read, you go online, you think of different possibilities, right? But the truth is, even even in those situations, when we've done all of the hard work to make the best decision we can, is there still fundamentally uncertainty? Because we're finite, are there things that we just can never fully weigh into the mix to be certain that whatever decision we're making for ourselves or for a loved one is going to be the right, the best, the correct decision, right? Life is full of uncertainty, and that comes from the fact that we are finite. Only a God could be infinite. Only a God could know everything there is to know. Only a deity, right? But what is it to be human? We're not, right? We're little fractals of a much larger universe, right? And that's awe-inspiring. And a lot of art and music and religion comes from that recognition. But in our day-to-day lives, we have to make decisions that can affect us and other people, right? And because we're finite, we can never guarantee that those decisions are always going to play, right? You're in the right place at the right time. Good for you. Or you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. How awful, right? So we're surrounded in a world of uncertainty. Now, I would be lecturing to you this way, even if there was no such thing going on in our lives as COVID virus, right? But does the COVID situation bring that home existentially even more for you? It ought to, right? So we take precautions, or some people think we don't need to take precautions. And so their behaviors could affect them, could affect other people around them. You need to go to the store. If you're at the, good luck, bad luck. We do everything we can to protect ourselves, but there's still this randomness. There's still this chance. There's still this uncertainty in life. Um, okay, so to just kind of sum that up, because we're more aware than other animals, we are aware of time and the passage of time. We are aware that we are finite. And out of those two things come an awareness of mortality. One thing I discovered, and I bet some of you can remember this as little kids, is the rules ain't any different for me. I'm not going to live forever. Life is short. We have to do the very best we can in an uncertain world. And the one thing I can be sure of is I'm mortal. Just like everybody else, I will age, have already been, and I will die. Right? Now, you can hear that in a very hopeless, existentially nihilistic despairing, right? But I'd like to present it in a slightly different way, in a way that the humanists talk about. The fact that you're mortal and the fact that you and I live with uncertainty, even though that's scary and makes us feel anxious, can it also sometimes be the kick in the ass that you and I need to grow and develop? Imagine for a moment that you were immortal, and it's very hard to imagine that, right? Imagine that you could live forever. Where's the urgency to live today? Why live today? Because there'll be an endless series of tomorrows in which you can do whatever it is. And you see, so in another sense, the fact that we're aware of our limitations is also a driving force in humanistic psych to build a life, right? Now, if this makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to, because humanistic existential psychology is based on the idea that if you find the courage to kind of face the basic human condition honestly and directly, you are going to feel scared sometimes. You're going to feel anxious. In other words, to live with the truth and to live honestly in the world, to see it the way it really is going to create what they call existential anxiety, where it makes me anxious to think about how many years I have left, right? It makes me anxious to know that I need to take responsibility to make choices for myself, right? But I can never guarantee that the choices are going to be exactly going to work out the way that I want them to, right? So instead of seeing anxiety as necessarily a symptom of psychological illness, to a humanistic psychologist, to existentialists, sometimes feeling anxious is actually a sign of mental health, because it means you're facing the basic situation that you need to face if you want to live a meaningful, purposeful life. Right? Um, Now, because this basic human condition makes us anxious, existential anxiety, um, Humanistic psychologists would kind of agree with the Freudians up to a point that sometimes if we get too anxious about where we find ourselves in life, we use a variety of defense mechanisms, remember Anna Freud, to try to push the truth away. Right? We sometimes don't want to think about things that upset us, like mortality, like finiteness, right? We live as if we are immortal. Do you all know people who live as if, with no real conscious awareness of how vulnerable they are? Did I just describe a lot of young people and many older people as well? Right? Do we sometimes pretend that we're not really all that responsible for our own lives? Right? And so there is an overlap, a piece of an overlap between psychoanalysis and humanistic psych, but there's also a very big difference. Remember in Freud's theory, the line that we talked about early in the semester from the movie A Few Good Men, quote, "You can't handle the truth." Humanistic psychologists do not agree with that. Humanistic psychologists argue in a pushback on psychoanalysis that human beings are far stronger psychologically than Freud ever gave us credit for. Humanistic psychologists believe that even though the basic human condition is difficult and can make us anxious, that we have the ability to face it. And if we're willing to face it, then we can grow and develop and self-actualize as we go through our lifespan. Now, they also recognize that there's all kinds of tools, mental strategies, ego defense mechanisms that you and I use sometimes when the truth is unbearable, right? If at a given moment it's too scary, could I use denial? Could I just repress it? Could I intellectualize and kind of not let myself feel what I'm feeling and just try to think about things, right? Could I use projection and hold the world responsible instead of holding myself responsible for the choices that I make in life, like the victim stance and so on? But where psychoanalysts believe that you and I can never really fully transcend our defense mechanisms because we can't handle the truth, humanistic psychologists believe that we can. They're not saying it's easy. And they're not saying it's like you do it all at once and then for the rest of your life you see the truth and, but we have to kind of fight that battle every day, perhaps. But humanistic existential psychologists see human personality as fundamentally stronger than the classic Freudians did years back. And this has led to the rise in America of a movement called positive psychology, which is the study of what's right with us rather than just focusing on liabilities and what's wrong with us. Okay, so we're still talking about the basic human condition. We have time, finiteness, mortality. Let me add a couple more. Existential psychologists and philosophers basically argue that the truth is we don't know how we got here, and we really don't know where we're going. And this is called, there's a term for this in existential philosophy, again in quotes, it's called thrownness, to be thrown into the world. What's the one thing I know, or I think I know? So I don't take a lot of drugs anymore. It makes me too nervous, right? Here I am, I exist. Existential, the root word of existential is existence, to exist. I don't know what was or wasn't before I was here. And while I can create all kinds of religious ideas about what happens when I'm dead, there are a bunch of ideas, right? Hundreds of religions on the planet Earth. Not every religion believes in an afterlife. Many do, some do not, right? But it's speculation. I can speculate on where I was, if I was at all, before I was born, right? There was nothing and then here I am, Big Bang, right? Or I lived in a different incarnation before I was born. It's an idea. It's a thought. That's all it is. Right? And is there a heaven and is there a hell? And what will happen to me when I'm dead and gone, if anything, right? Will I be back to where it's an idea, right? So to an existentialist, you have to start with where you're at. And the only thing that we really know is here I am, now what, right? I exist, okay? So again, can you see that humanistic existential psychology is going to sometimes be challenging and anxiety producing for people who have certain sorts of religious beliefs, right? And that's not to be provocative, it's not to start trouble for no reason, but they're grounded in a different soil than a lot of the ways that people think in life. They're grounded in the only thing that we know is we exist, and we exist in a world where we'll never know as much as we wish we could know to have all of the answers. So we're in this kind of mysterious sort of place. Throw in this. I don't know how I got here. I don't know where I'm going. All I can do is deal with what I've got here, right? Now, remember, different theories have different time orientations. Freud's theory, here you are now on your timeline. Here's your childhood back here, right? If I want to understand you now, I need to retrospectively look at your experiences in childhood, right? So Freud is a retrospective theory, okay? Then we covered theories like Adler, right? Don't tell me where you've been, tell me where you want to go. Tell me about your hopes, your dreams, your fears for the future. Those are prospective theories of personality. So, what are humanist theories? Well, humanistic psychologists recognize that part of who we are today is from where we've already been, and part of it is also where we want to go. But those two places, retro and pro, are not what's important. How do we make the best decisions for ourselves from a humanistic point of view? Who are we really? It all has to do with what's going on in us right here, right now. Humanistic existential theories are called here and now theories. They don't focus so much on the past, they don't focus so much on the future. They argue that everything that's in you and everything that summarizes who you are in the world is right here, right now. It's all in there, right? So if you had a lousy childhood and you're 22 years old, right? If right here, right now, you believe that that childhood is the explanation for who you are in the world today, there you go, right? But all that stuff that happened is gone, right? You may still think about it, it may still trigger emotions in you, but it's in the past. Time has moved on. Okay? So their starting place for understanding human nature, human personality, is to deeply explore what happens in us moment to moment to moment. Now, I'm wondering if any of you were thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, that sounds like what I know about meditation, right? So let's just kind of think about that just a little bit, right? Would you agree with me that a lot of human suffering happens when we leave the moment and we either get lost in the past, would have, could have, should have, why did I, why didn't I, or lost in the future? Uh-oh, what's going to happen? What if, what if, what if, what if? Sound familiar, right? To a humanistic and existential psychologist, dealing with what's going on in you and around you moment to moment to moment will set you free. Getting lost in the past will trap you. Getting lost in dread and fear of the future will trap you. The only way we can free ourselves up psychologically is to strengthen our ability to deal with what's happening in real time. Now, for those of you who meditate, does this sound like one of the key ideas in many, many different types of meditation? to see how the human mind, to see how easy it is for the human mind to get lost in the past and to get lost in the future, and how that takes us away from really understanding and developing deep insight into who we are right here, right now. Now, to a Freudian, right, those chains from the past can keep us trapped. Right? And to a Freudian, to understand you at the age of 22, you need to look to the past. But to a humanistic psychologist, that's not that important. Right? What's important is focusing on what are you feeling in your mind and in your body, moment to moment. What are you thinking? Isn't it interesting that I think this thought and suddenly I feel a bad feeling in my chest, right? And that just happened 5 seconds ago. Right? So it's a different sort of approach. And it actually, in many ways, dovetails with meditation. Meditation exists in every culture on the planet Earth. All humans in all cultures have discovered it, right? And there's meditation can be tied to different religions and different philosophies, but when you strip all that away, one of the fundamental things that we engage in meditation really is very tied to humanistic existential thinking. It's to learn about ourselves by dealing with what's happening in us moment to moment. Now, does AA and NA recognize this? One day at a time. And if that's too overwhelming, an hour at a time. And if that's too overwhelming, a minute at a time. Focus on what's going on here, right? Now, the basic human condition is about now. And that's going to make us anxious. But that's a kind of anxiety, they argue, Rogers argues, and so does Maslow, that we can grow from. It's okay to be anxious if you're scared because you're dealing with what's going on right here, right now, and it's scary. It doesn't mean it has to be scary. It could be blissful, but let's say it's scary. But you see, there's another kind of anxiety that humanistic psychologists talk about. And that's a kind of anxiety that we don't grow from. In fact, it's the anxiety that keeps us trapped. When we spend more time lost in the past or lost in the future, that too makes us anxious. But that's not existential anxiety. That's called neurotic anxiety. So you see, to a humanistic psychologist, you can't escape from anxiety. You're either going to feel the anxiety of your own growth, struggling in the moment to figure out what's going on in you and around you, and that's going to be scary sometimes. Or you're going to substitute neurotic, unhealthy anxiety, would have, could have, should have, regrets, or simply nostalgia. Oh, my life was so good back then and now, and it was so wonderful. Or the neurotic anxiety of being lost in the future. What's tomorrow going to bring? What's next year going to bring? My mom's going to die someday, right? Those, once we leave the timeline of now and we get lost here or here, we're in trouble. And that kind of anxiety we don't grow from. It keeps us trapped. Right? Okay, two more pieces of the basic human condition, and then we're going to move on. I'm going to let this go for tonight. The next one, so we've got time, finiteness, mortality, thrownness. There's two more. Choice and responsibility. And those two things are two different sides to the same coin. Humanistic existential psychologists argue in a variety of different ways that once you're no longer a helpless infant or very young child, you have a lot of responsibility for the decisions you make in life. And now this is, let me be real clear, this is not saying that we have complete responsibility and control. In fact, you already know from the previous discussion that humanists believe we often, because we're finite, we don't. But to a humanistic psychologist, We are responsible for our choices in life. Now, to a Freudian, where are a lot of those choices located? Not in the conscious, but in the unconscious. And humanistic psychologists recognize that sometimes we make a choice in the moment that may reflect things that we're not fully aware of. But to a humanistic psychologist, if you want to consciously be aware of what's going on in you, and you're willing to engage in that and face that courageously, you damn well can. So let's just kind of think about this issue of choice, right? If we had no ability to make choices and control our own lives, then we would not be responsible. But we do, right? And so now it gets tricky talking about choice because you and I know that choice is very difficult sometimes, right? And people will say, well, I have a drug addiction. I have no choice. It's a genetic thing, or my brain got, adapted neurologically, chemically to the drug. Right? But when you look at people in recovery, even if that's partly true, are there still choices that people make? Can you choose whether to drive your car down the street where you used to score drugs, or can you choose to drive your car in a different direction? To give you a concrete example, right? If you feel you're slipping, do you have the ability to make a choice as to whether you pick up the phone at a given moment and reach out for help, or whether you don't pick up the phone and you just kind of curl up in a fetal position, right? This is not saying life is easy, and it is not saying we have anything near complete control, right? If you were diagnosed, God forbid, with a terminal illness, you can't choose to stop that illness, but can you make some choices about how you are going to deal with the fact that you have this on your plate? Right? If you have a son or a daughter who is struggling, you may not be able to fix them and heal them, but can you make some choices about how you want to interact with them in the best way that you know how? Right? To a humanistic psychologist and to an existentialist, they have a radical position when it comes to choice. Even though they recognize we don't have anything near complete control, they do argue that especially when we're adults, we are responsible for the choices that we make. So, I like that idea, but it's very hard to live that idea. Think about how often we think to ourselves, boy, she just pissed me off. He makes me happy. He makes me sad. She makes me nervous. To a humanistic psychologist, that's not true. You do whatever shtick you do, and I'm responsible for how I respond to the shtick that you do, and vice versa, right? So you get in my face and you give me a hard time. She made me upset. You're just the stimulus out there. I made me upset. Now, you can take this idea too far, right? But do you see why this is kind of an important concept in humanistic psychology, right? If it's really true that it's all about you controlling me, then I am completely helpless. But if I have some ability to choose and to practice how I'm going to respond to the events around me, good or bad, the things in my life, right, then that's how I can grow. Um, don't get me wrong. People are victimized. Please understand what I'm saying in the way I say it. Right? But have you ever met somebody who has embraced what is called the victim stance in life for years? Somebody who finds taking responsibility for themselves so terrifying, and I get that, I understand that, but so scary that they prefer to see themselves as being victims. Look what my mother did or didn't do. Look what she said to me. Look what my coworker did to me last week, right? Look at how I've got this unexpected bill in the mail, right? The victim stance traps us. It's not only leads to despair and depression, it blocks our ability to grow and self-actualize. Right? So I'm not saying that, there are victims, yes, right? But when you look at people who have been victimized for real, for years of living, and when you look at how people who are victimized move into recovery and change their lives, did that involve at some point owning their responsibility to make the best choices they can at this point in their life? Yes. Okay. So I have spent 40 minutes exploring with you the basic assumptions of humanistic psychology, and we haven't even gotten to Rogers yet. That's where we're going. But you know what? When I look at my notes over here to the side, even though that was like just point one, I actually embedded, as I look more closely, three other points that I was going to talk about. So I kind of conglomerated them. Now, let me just ask before we move on. Does this theory have a different feeling to you as compared to behaviorism, right? Some of the comments, Jillian made this comment, a couple of other folks made this comment, is that especially Skinner's theory, it seemed to be more like superficial, not bad necessarily, but just more dealing with how humans build new habits via classical and operant conditioning. Does this feel different? It should. Does this try to go at the core of what human nature is all about, right? We're not the same as other animals. We are distinctly different. We're faced with a condition from our whole lives, and we're struggling with it. We have to engage with it. We're going to be scared sometimes. Anxiety is inevitable. Would you rather be anxious for the right reasons, or would you rather be anxious for the BS reasons? Okay, it's a very different way of thinking. Okay, so we're at 42 minutes. I am about to shut this down. You will hear from me tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to send you a final exam tomorrow. Let's call it a final exam, right? But it's going to be limited. It's going to be different than the ones that I normally give. And then I have one more video to record and upload. And today's Monday. I'll do that Wednesday and get that to you. And that'll be the last one. So again, hope you're all well. R. Linden at sussex.edu if you need to reach out to me. I think you've probably all gotten your grades. Did I mention last class that if anybody didn't, you should email me, but I think you all did. Grades were really good. Okay, so read your emails tomorrow. Take care, everyone.